Okay, once everybody is come in and sitting comfortably, the talk which I suggested I give today, I did make a kind of reference to it yesterday or this morning, and that was to talk about the nature of Cetana, of the will. And the reason I give this as a subject for a Dhamma talk is that it's a very, very, very important part of the mind, and I usually associate it with the fourth khandha, the sankhara, volitional tendencies, or whatever I think it's called, I forget now exactly. But that sankhara, the will, I noticed many, many years ago during meditation, is something which really does need to be understood, and also to be seen as not as your possession, as not as your ability to do this or to do that. Even though we cherish the thing which we call the will, what actually is it? And I do know that when you do practice mindfulness, you can observe the will. You can see it happening. But what are you actually seeing? And I was fascinated by the work of a psychologist called Professor Libet, Libet. And you can look up his name and look up his work on the internet. And this professor had a kind of doubt. This thing which we call the will, this thing which we notice as the will, this thing which we can be mindful of, which precedes an action of body or speech, what everybody assumes is the will. Is it the will? Does it initiate the action of body or speech? And what Professor Libet did, with a very simple experiment repeated so many hundreds and thousands of times, was he had his students they were wired up with some electronics on their brain, and also they had the instructions whenever they wished to, whenever they wanted to, they would just close the palm of their hand, or they would open it. And when they noticed that they made a decision they were going to close their hand, they would press a simple button. When they wanted to open it, they pressed the button again. And so this professor was noticing when they were aware of their will and when the opening of their hand actually occurred, and trying to get rid of any sort of imperfections in that experiment. He did notice that when a person made that decision, or rather when they were aware that they were making a decision, it was maybe about half a second before the action actually happened. But at the same time, because of the electronics on their brain or on their head, scanning their brain as they were doing this, he also noticed something he called the readiness potential. Parts of the brain lit up another half a second before the will appeared and before the movement happened. What he proved, beyond any possible doubt, was that which you are aware of as the will is not what initiates the speech or the action. It's part of the process. Something else initiates speech and action, and then a half a second afterwards, that which we can recognize as a will occurs, and then the action happens afterwards. And because this happens all the time, we've just associated this sensation which we can be aware of as the will. And we assume that that causes our actions of body and speech, and that we have some control over that thing we call the will. But the first thing he proved, that is not the beginning of actions of body and speech. It's part of the process, not the beginning of the process. And he did that experiment so well, and people try to find fault with it so often, they never could. So what does actually start your actions of body or speech? Why do you do anything? Or in a much broader question, why did you come here for this retreat? Did you freely choose to come here? And that's a very challenging question. You assume that you did, but I'm challenging you to doubt that. One of the things which made it quite clear to me that many of the things we perceive as free choice are not free choice. One of the most disturbing lectures I ever went to was at Cambridge University. I think it must have been around 1970, where we invited a hypnotist to demonstrate what hypnotism actually is. And we were just a bunch of male students, so we were very courageous, adventurous at that age. So many of us volunteered to see if we were good hypnotic subjects. I was not a good hypnotic subject, but there was always one or two of the students who were very good at being hypnotized. And he chose one of these students, this lecturer, and he put him in full hypnosis. And he made him do a few stupid things like hypnotists do, just to entertain us. But then he said to this student, when I touch my right earlobe, just here, you will stand up no matter what you're doing, stand up, and you'll sing the British national anthem in full voice from beginning to end. In those days, in the late 60s or 70s, students were not that patriotic. We were mostly rebellious. So the idea of singing the British national anthem was not something we would normally do. But anyway, the hypnotist said that when he takes a student out of hypnosis, he won't remember that he was told to do this, but then when the hypnotist touches his right earlobe, he will follow the instructions. And then he took the student out of hypnosis. And being a fellow student, I was just wondering whether this would work or not. Surely it can't work. How can anybody do something which in those days was considered so stupid? But then the hypnotist touched his right earlobe. And the student, like in the middle of a hall of 150, 200 people, stood up from his seat and started singing in a loud voice, God Save the Queen, the full version from beginning to end. And young students like me, we were laughing our heads off. It was uproar. We thought it was the funniest thing we'd seen all year. It was a crazy thing to do. And no matter how much we laughed or jeered, this student carried on singing to the very end. If that was me, I'd be humiliated. everybody laughing at me and jeering at me. Of course I would stop, but not this fellow. He followed the hypnotist's instructions and sang it from beginning to the very last verse. And then he sat down. It took us another few minutes to stop laughing. But then the hypnotist asked us to be quiet. And he asked this young student, "Why did you do that?" And this was a point which sent cold shivers up my spine. He gave a logical reason for an event which is an impossible thing to do. He gave a reason, and it became very clear to me and everybody else in that room that he thought it was free choice. It appeared to him that he'd freely chosen to sing the British national anthem, no matter how many other of his friends were laughing at him. And that's what shocked me. How come that something which we knew was implanted in him by the hypnotist, and it was just ridiculed by everybody else, to him it still seemed like free will? And that sent kind of shivers up my spine, because then I started to think, contemplate, how many of the other things which I do I freely choose to do? And how many of those things are conditioned into me, like hypnotized, like brainwashed? Now you know I've been talking to you for many, many hours on this retreat. I have been, and I admit this, brainwashing you, conditioning you. Kind of hypnosis is the same thing, to go beyond your ordinary perceptions to your mind and giving these beautiful instructions. Yes, I have been brainwashing you, but in a totally benevolent way, to try and make sure that you get inspired to do things like keep precepts, to be inspired to sit down and meditate, to believe that you can get jhanas, to accept that you are able to become stream winners, once returners, non-returners, and arahats. For me to condition you to say this is possible and that you can do it. Whether you're a Sri Lankan, a Westerner, Australian, or wherever you come from, whether you are a monk or a nun, a layman, a laywoman, old or young, sick or healthy, you can do that. That is my duty to you, to say you can do it. And if you have confidence in me and let me brainwash you, you'd be surprised at how many barriers that takes away from you. And for the rest of my life I started noticing why I choose to do things, where these teachings come from, why I meditate in the way I do. It's not my achievements. It doesn't even come from me at all. I find that I've been just very fortunate in being brainwashed by other great monks, especially by an Ajahn Chah, by a monk like an Ajahn Tate, like all the other people which I've seen in my life as a monk. These are the people who have had more of an influence on me than I could ever imagine. And to give you an understanding of this is embarrassing for me to say, but when I was a student, I think my first year as a student at Cambridge, I noticed that many senior professors, especially in maths and physics, they would actually smoke a pipe. If you've ever seen photographs of Albert Einstein, he would always have a pipe, and with tobacco in the end. Remember, these days we all know just how dangerous tobacco is. But at those days we weren't really that well informed. So I brought a pipe. I thought that would make me look cool. I was a scientist, and that was part of the official uniform of top scientists, a pipe with some tobacco. But then I also recalled watching the television in those days. And one of the adverts on television was for a brand of tobacco called St. Bruno tobacco. Now, in the advert on the TV, they had this ordinary-looking young man was walking down a street somewhere in England, and no one was paying any attention to him. But then he got out his pipe, this was on the TV, put the tobacco, St. Bruno tobacco, in his pipe, lit it, and started smoking it while he was walking down the street. And the next thing I noticed on this advert was this incredibly beautiful blonde who was working in a sort of a grocery shop, smelt that tobacco, and just was so enchanted by its aroma. She left the shop and started following him, waiting to hear his first command. And as he was walking, he passed a newsagent, and another incredibly supermodel-like brunette also smelt the aroma of the tobacco and started following him. It was just an ordinary street, but all these very, very, very beautiful women, as soon as they smelt the aroma of St. Bruno tobacco, they couldn't help themselves. They were following him, waiting to serve his every need. And then the caption came up, St. Bruno tobacco, irresistible to members of the opposite gender. Remember, I was intelligent, I thought. I was at university, at Cambridge. I was supposed to be smart. The embarrassing thing for me to tell you is that I bought some St. Bruno tobacco. I was looking for a girlfriend at the time. Not an ordinary one, but a nice one. A young student. So I tried that St. Bruno tobacco. And I walked down the street in Cambridge. And I lit the pipe. No one left any of the shops. And after a couple of minutes, the only thing following me was a dog. I totally bought into that stupid advert. And that kind of concerned me. A few times I've asked people, what are adverts like these days on TV or on the internet? Have you ever noticed how illogical, stupid, lowbrow the adverts are? They promise so much impossible things. And they sometimes make them funny. They make them so lowbrow that people think only a fool would buy that product. And then they go and buy it. It gets underneath their protections. Those adverts actually work. In business, many business leaders tell me that for every $1,000 you spend in advertising, generally speaking, you get $3,000 back in extra sales and profits. It's a very lucrative way of getting people to buy your product. So how many products are you buying? Not through free choice, but you've got brainwashed by the advertisements. It's one of the reasons why politicians use advertisements, because they actually work. Doesn't matter who's a good politician, who's the one who works hardest. It's the advertisements which often get people elected. And that's scary. So how does that work? Do you really think you have free will? Why do you do things? For many years when I was with Ajahn Chah, he would give many talks, and many of the similes he'd repeat over and over and over again. And some of those similes were humorous, which is why I remembered them. If you add humor to your Dhamma talks, some of those messages get underneath your radar. They condition you much more strongly than a message which is boring. The message which is boring might be true, but the message which is funny actually gets remembered. Many times after I've given a talk, usually over in Perth, and I ask people, what did you remember from the talk? And they say they remember the jokes. I've told them, those aren't just jokes. Those are stories. They're humorous. But you remember them, and they do actually brainwash you. Even that story I told, I think I told it here, about the black African soldier. And they said, where are you taking that dirty dog to? And when he got to the end of the destination, he didn't pay because dogs don't have money. What other thing did Ajahn Chah tell me? I remember him telling me this so many times, because I think it's even in Sri Lanka. I don't know Sinhalese culture that much, but what's the worst thing someone can tell you? I know in Thailand, calling you a dog, the bad word for a dog. If they call you a dog, that's really insulting. So Ajahn Chah told me, if anybody ever calls you a dog, this is the way to deal with it. You look at your bottom and see if you have a tail. If you don't have a tail, you can't be a dog. End of problem. Ha 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 ha. He said that so many times. Because it was amusing, I learnt how to remember it. It went deep inside, and it changed the way I responded to criticism. So these are little ways of conditioning you in such a powerful way. It gets underneath, let's say, your radar, and it becomes how you behave in a very good way. You keep your precepts. Right, the precepts of not taking alcohol. How can you convince Sri Lankan laymen and lay women about the dangers of alcohol? You just say, oh, keep the 5 precepts. Many of you do. Well done. But there's a lot of people who don't in Sri Lanka today. So how can you convince them? And I'm not sure about Sinhalese, but Thais are very, very, very afraid of ghosts. Are the Sinhalese afraid of ghosts? Are they? Yeah. Okay, well, in Thailand they're terrified of ghosts. So I told them, I told them about the danger of real ghosts. And I said sometimes that people get possessed. And I said to them, I've seen this with my own eyes. Like, I'm a monk, I can't lie. I've seen people being possessed by this special type of ghost. And we give it a name. It's called the bottle ghost. And this bottle ghost is one of the most dangerous ghosts, certainly in Thailand, but I think also here in Sri Lanka. And when you get possessed by one of these ghosts, they take over. You cannot walk in a straight line. You cannot even speak properly. And if you drive a car, you can't keep control of the car, and it can kill you. That's how dangerous the bottle ghost is. And I'm sure you've heard me tell this story before, and you know what the bottle ghost is. It's whiskey, rum, vodka, and all these other liquids. In the West we call them what? Spirits. So you get overcome and possessed by spirits which live in a bottle. They should stay in the bottle. Don't uncork it. It's very dangerous. So when you tell a story like that, people giggle and they laugh the first time, but it's more than telling a joke. Somehow or other, it gets a psychological message which is much deeper. And it encourages you, when you go past a shop or someone offers you some of this, you don't take any. Why? You've been brainwashed not to. It's for your health and happiness and well-being. Many of the things which I noticed I did, where did that come from? I was not born a Buddhist. Why do I try and become honest and reliable? And if I promise something, I would try my very, very best to do that. I live up to my promises. And when I ask why, a lot of times, if I do have the opportunity to meditate, I can remember the time when Ajahn Chah told me to do that. It's weird. It's not me who decides. It's someone I respected so much, so greatly. And he said that to me. And that's where my behavior comes from. And some of the wisdom as well. The deeper wisdom, such as letting go. How can you let go? You can't do it. It has to be conditioned into you by somebody else. This is a deeper explanation of that meaning of paratagosa, the words of another. One of the causes, essential, necessary causes for seeing the Dhamma and becoming a stream winner. How can you do that? How could the Buddha become enlightened? What was the words of another for him? And don't say that the Buddha was a special case. Of course he was extra special, but he still needed the words of another. Who do you think those words of another, where they came from? I did give you the answer a few days ago. That was from the Buddha Kassapa, in a previous life which Siddhartha Gautama lived with Buddha Kassapa. That's where he would have got his words of another from. Previous life, but a very powerful previous life. And so a lot of times it answers one of these questions for me. It's just, how can a person become enlightened by themselves. They do need to have association with other enlightened people, at least stream winners. Not on the path, but people who have seen the Dhamma. And if you have associated with people who have seen the Dhamma, that is so necessary, that makes it possible for you to see the Dhamma as well. You can't see it by yourself. You need input from outside, conditioning, brainwashing if you like, from somebody else who sees things in a totally different way. You can't let go. You need someone else to turn off that switch of controlling. And of course it also answered the question of, what is this will? I know that years and years ago, when meditation was going well and going really deep, there was these two last hurdles. I think you all know how hard it is to be still enough, to let go enough to get into a nimitta or jhana. That's a big hindrance. I keep telling you, don't do it. Let it happen naturally. Don't interfere, don't get involved, don't try to get deep meditation. Have you been successful yet? Why? Because you haven't let go of this attachment, this identification between you and this thing which does stuff, your will. Once you can see that, meditation becomes so much easier. You can let go. It's the easiest thing in the world to do. Why not? Just let go. Simple teaching. You can do something later on, but just for the next hour, just let go and bliss out in jhanas. If it was that easy, would you take that option? Yeah. But it's not that easy, is it? When these things start to arise, you should be able to perceive there's something inside of you wants to control it, is afraid of it, wants to be in power of it. That's where control comes from. These are such huge experiences. You have to disappear for these things to happen, and you're not willing to do that. Although I must say that sometimes that people let go enough just by fluking it. That's what I sometimes say, but these days I kind of wonder, is this coming from some past life, like Siddhartha Gautama when he was a kid? And I think that often it must be some past life where the mind kind of remembers, but it can't put it into words. Because I know a few people who've just, for want of a better word, fluked these jhanas. There was one occasion, one example, that when I was teaching in Malaysia, in Penang, yes, Malaysia is a majority Muslim country, but there's so many Buddhists, Chinese Buddhists, and because the northern part of Malaysia used to be part of Thailand, and there's many Buddhist monasteries there, and it's a strong traditional Buddhism there. And so I've gone there to teach, so many times. And on one occasion when I was teaching there, they said, if you have a spare half an hour, there is a Malaysian woman who's come to see you. She's had some kind of psychosis. And no psychologist or psychiatrist in Malaysia has ever been able to understand what she experienced and give her some help. Ajahn Brahm, can you give it a try? And I am quite adventurous. Let's give it a try. So she came in to this interview room, and I just asked her. Many people like being interviewed by Buddhist monks, counseled by Buddhist monks. You know why? Because we're very cheap. We don't give you a bill. And some of these psychologists and psychiatrists, they're incredibly expensive. As for me, just a cup of tea and I'll give you some good advice. So it's good value for money. So anyway, when she came in, she described what had happened to her. Not everybody describes the same thing, but when she described what had happened to her, I paused, looked her in the eye and said, "Madam, that was a first jhana." And I said, "This is also what happened." And when I started talking, she kept on saying, "Yes, yes, yes. At last someone understands what other people call psychosis." It's not psychosis. You just experience this beautiful state where your body vanished, your mind got very blissed out and still. She was so happy. She wasn't even a Buddhist. But somehow or other she fluked a jhana, or something happened. She got into one of these jhanas, and she was so blissed out afterwards for days. And she thought, "What's happened to me?" No one could explain it to her. And when I said these other things which happened in the jhana, she realized, yes, this monk knows what he's talking about. And this helped her enormously. So she went away a very happy woman. The reason I tell that story is to show that this does happen in our community to some people for all sorts of weird reasons. And anyway, that when you understand just what I'm saying, I am conditioning you of the possibility of these jhanas. If this woman who had no training at all could experience a jhana, why can't you? It's why I said many times that people get these deep meditations on the very last day of the retreat, which is tomorrow. Don't try today. Wait until... Now that is actually conditioning you. A lot of you trust me, and so those little messages go deep inside of you, and you understand why this works. So a lot of the training is actually much more than just understanding Buddhism philosophically. It's more powerful than that. And look, some of the other things which Ajahn Chah taught me. This was a teaching Ajahn Chah gave on the first couple of months which I went to his monastery to meditate in. He told this simile, and I thought this was the most ridiculous, craziest, mad simile with no justification from the sutras that I'd ever heard. And this was from Ajahn Chah. And it was a simile of the mango orchard. And Ajahn Chah began this simile by saying that his monastery, Wat Ba Pong, was a mango orchard. I couldn't see any mango trees in that forest. And he said, these mango trees were planted by no less than the Buddha himself. Oh, come on, this is crazy. The Buddha never visited northeast Thailand, and even if he did and he planted some mango trees, do you reckon they could still be there 2,500 years plus afterwards? No way. I was already rejecting this. And then he said, these mango trees today, right now, are very ripe. They're full of mangoes, thousands of mangoes. And these are the most delicious mangoes you've ever eaten in your life. I was only 24 years old then. Now I became interested. He was talking about food. And I was a very hungry young monk then. But he said, there's a problem with these mangoes on the trees planted by the Lord Buddha. He said, the problem is getting one of these mangoes and being able to eat them. He said, you may take a stick and throw it up at the tree to get the mangoes to fall, which was an usual way of doing it. But he said the mangoes won't fall, ever fall that way. You can't throw a stick to knock them down. You can't get a ladder to reach those mangoes. You can't climb the tree to reach those mangoes. You can't shake the tree to get those mangoes. These days, I extend his simile. You cannot get a cherry picker or a helicopter to get those mangoes. You can't cut the tree down to get those mangoes. Ajahn Chah said, there's only one way to get the most delicious ripe mangoes you've ever eaten from the trees planted by the Buddha. That way to get the mango is you have to sit perfectly still, emphasizing perfectly still, under that mango tree. Open your hand up and a mango will fall right into your hand. That was so, please excuse me, that was so dumb. That was ridiculous. Have you ever sat under a mango tree, a real one? How long do you think you have to wait when you put a hand up before one falls right in the palm of your hand? If it does fall, it'll probably fall on your head, not in the hand. And so I thought, I was stupid. So many other good things Ajahn Chah said. Well, I stayed as his student, but that particular simile I rejected, even though he repeated it several days in a row. And then over the years, I practiced, went to other monasteries, eventually went over to Perth, and even over there I still forgot it for many years. It just went out of my memory, I thought. Then one day when I was meditating and got a nice meditation, after emerging from that meditation, that simile came up. And I hadn't remembered it for such a long time, for many years. And I thought, what's going on? Now I could understand it. It was a beautiful simile, so accurate. And it's like I asked forgiveness of Ajahn Chah even though he was dead at this time. Thank you for that great simile. Because that's how meditation works. You sit perfectly still. You open up your hand. It's wonderful. Open the doors of your heart no matter what happens. That loving kindness, that compassion, which is, I say, is such an essential ingredient of the ability to experience deep meditation and get paths and fruit with the kindness. So you open the hand out. That's like the kindness. You're perfectly still. That's the samadhi and the jhana. And these mangoes fall. You don't climb the tree. You don't ask for the mangoes. They just fall. Brilliant. But the main reason I say that now to you is why had I forgotten that for so many years? You know that story. I remember it clearly. And it's not written up in any book of Ajahn Chah's teachings. And I think one of the reasons it was not written up in any of those books because So many of the monks never understood what Ajahn Chah was saying. And it was only one of my books, I forget actually which one it was, I realized, look, this has to be said. It's a beautiful, accurate, impressive simile. So I wrote it up in one of these other books, at least, so there's a record of it. So where did it go in all those years? It was like a seed planted. Where did Siddhartha Gautama have the insight to sit under the Bodhi tree? There was a seed planted in his previous life by the Buddha Kassapa. Why am I coming here to teach each one of you? Do I expect any of you to get enlightened on this retreat? Unlikely. But the seeds which are planted, that type of brainwashing is very powerful. And many years in the future, many lifetimes in the future, I don't know. All of you, you think, I'm only just a lay person. Oh, I've got all these diseases, I can't really meditate. Oh, I'm getting close to the end of my life now. I can't meditate as freely as these monks and nuns. I got so many responsibilities. No. Seeds get planted. And those seeds get planted. That is the cause of this thing you call the will. You are conditioned. You're all conditioned beings. I remember giving this talk some years ago, and there's this monk, I'm sure you may have heard of him, Ajahn Sujata. He was one of my friends. He's over in Sydney. He gave this talk a title, Why Ajahn Brahm Tells Bad Jokes. As you know, I tell many jokes, and many of them are bad. Here's one for you, which I hope you haven't heard yet. I'm not sure if it's the same in Sri Lanka, but in countries like England, US, Europe, Australia, it's very hard to get kids up in the morning to go to school. So this morning, the mother went to her son's bedroom and said, "Son, get up, you've got to go to school." And the son replied, "Mummy, I don't like school." "But son, you have to go to school." "But I don't want to. The other kids don't like me, the teachers don't like me, no one likes me in school. But you have to go. Give me one good reason why I should go to school, Mummy." "Because you're the headmaster." Even teachers don't like getting up in the morning to teach at school. Now that's a bad joke, I admit it. So why do I tell bad jokes? And Ajahn Sujata was smart enough to know it's because my father told bad jokes. He was always coming home telling bad jokes. And because of that, he conditioned me. He brainwashed me. So please don't blame me. Ajahn Brahm, you shouldn't tell bad jokes in Dhamma talks. Sorry, I was conditioned by my father. And that's actually so true. So, when you realized about your conditioning and how much it affects your will, that's one of the reasons why it's good that you listen to Dhamma talks by good monks and nuns. Why you read good books on the Dhamma. Why you talk with other monks who are good practitioners. You can't do it by yourself. You need the assistance of other good people. And that assistance is there. And then when you do that, you find you just want to meditate more. And you meditate with a smile on your face, instead of grimacing like you're going to the dentist or something. Meditation is one of the most joyful things you can ever do. And if you understand what meditation is, you look forward to it. A retreat, yes. An hour by myself I can spend in my room, yes. It's something you're looking forward to. This is, the Buddha said, one of his phrases, and when I saw this, I thought, wow, the mind leaps onto stillness, leaps onto the joy of meditation, leaps onto the nimitta. You see the nimitta, boom, you go to it straight away. It's like a dear old friend. Nimitta, come over here. Or you go over there and you hang out together. It's not you do that as a training because you have to. Ajahn Brahmavamso said, I need a nimitta to get samadhi. Oh, blah, blah, blah. I suppose I better. It's not that at all. You just want to. You see this joy coming up. You get attracted to this. Solitude. People think that solitude is just so lonely, so dreary. There's something wrong with you, Ajahn Brahmavamso. You should go and get your brain tested or go and see a psychiatrist. You want to be in solitude. No way. Solitude is beautiful, is blissful. Your attitude changes, and what you get attracted to changes. Yeah, I used to chase girls when I was a young man, but now I chase nimittas. They're much more reliable than any man or woman. And then after a while, you just have lots of nimittas, have a beautiful time. And you understand what this will is, where it comes from. It's not yours. When you really notice it's not yours, then it's easy to let go of. If you believe your will belongs to you, that it protects you, then you're misunderstanding things. Often I give a simile of a prison. You know, in prison that you do have, this is one of the other similes, I just mentioned this to you. In a prison, where do you live in a prison? It's called a cell. That's why I tell people who have mobile phones, what's another name for a mobile phone? A cell phone. And if you have a cell phone, you spend so much time on it, it's like you're living in a cell. And you think it's so wonderful. You got such great reception. You can see so many bars on your cell. I've got 4 bars on my reception. Cannot you see the simile there? You're in prison. As I often say, you never own a mobile phone. The mobile phone owns you. Now, when I've said that, I'm not going to go any further with that. Whether you like it or not, I'm brainwashing you. And many of you will throw away your mobile phones or at least turn it off and have a much more peaceful life. So, anyway, and the other simile of a prison, you know, in a prison, they always have prison officers. These prison officers will always make you sure you do what they want. You stay in your cell. You keep the prison rules. You can't do what you like. You have to do what the sentence says you must do. You know who that prison officer is called? Will. Will is also a name for somebody. Like Prince William, for short, Will. Will also means just this Chaitanya. And you always feel that you own Chaitanya. You can control your will. You can make sure your will is wise and serves the purpose which you commit your life to. But you ever known your will go out of control? After a while you find your will tries to possess you and make you do stupid things. You know, in Buddhist cosmology, who is the biggest control freak in the universe? The head of the Paranimita Vasawati realm, those who control the creations of others. What's his name? Mara. Mara. I don't know, I've never read in the sutras or commentaries that Mara has a first name. If it was, it would be Will or Chaitanya. We always think the will is a good fellow. But when we realize where it comes from, it wants to control and possess you. That's why advertisements want to control who you vote for, what you buy, and what medicine you need. It's controlling you. And if you can see through that, you realize that's not who you are, it's not your possession. That's one of the big things you identify with as a self, disappears. You can be in a monastery and the head monk might ask you to do this and ask you to do that. Maybe not what you want to do, doesn't matter, because your will has just kind of disappeared. It's not who you are. If you make a mistake, not me. I never told that bad joke. My father did. You get a beautiful jhana. I didn't do that. That was Ajahn Chah. You give an interesting talk, a really inspiring one. Don't blame me. Don't praise me. That was all these wonderful teachers I've known over all these years. They're responsible for any talk I give, not me. My will, when you realize what it truly is just not there. And that makes it easy for you to stop doing things, to stop willing, to be perfectly still. The thing which stops you being still is suspended. What would happen then? You would get into these great jhanas. And in the jhanas, the first jhana, there is a kind of remnant of will, but not really. It's just a habitual reaction to bliss. You just want to try and hold on to it, rather than having confidence. It's going to be there, leave it alone. But the interference which you do is so slight, it just causes a wobble. And then when the sampasadhana comes up, you have the confidence and the trust in what you're experiencing, then you can let it totally go, and it be in the second jhana. It's how simple it is. And in those jhanas, one of the things you will notice, and this is one of the things I encourage you to notice, not what's there, not the bliss, but what had vanished. And one of the things which has vanished is your will. It's just not there. When you come out afterwards, you look, all over the place in those memories of the jhanas. You can't do anything. And you realize, especially in the second jhana, the bliss you feel, the cause of that bliss, is the absence of will. It's not there, and it's much more beautiful, heaps more blissful. You don't have this will always telling you what to do. That's why they say these jhanas, what was it, Andhakara Mara? Is that right? It makes Mara blind. They can't see you in there. They can't get to you in the jhanas. The head of the process of willing can't go there. So if you want to be free from Mara, you have to be free from will. You get into these jhanas and there you are. So that is what your will is. And I please apologize to you. I maybe should have told you beforehand that for all these last days I've been brainwashing you so much. And if you're smiling and tell some jokes, and you go back to your temple and say, why are you smiling so much? Why are you telling jokes? Please blame me. That'll be accurate. I cause you to do that. And keep on causing the rest of the people in your monastery to do that as well. Keep causing the rest of the people in your monastery to look for not for fame or for possessions, but for peace, wisdom, deep understanding, knowing the path into things like jhanas. And then maybe the Sangha in Sri Lanka will become incredibly strong again. Not just the Sangha, but all the lay people who visit, both in the positions of power in this country and in the villages as well. You can condition their will, change the way they do things. That's what I've been doing to you. Please, you do it to them. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Excellent.